Welcome to another episode of Dellet at Large, Aliyah Stories. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Dellet at Large, Aliyah Stories. I'm David Levine, and my guest today is someone who's walked a really remarkable path through education, family life, personal transformation, and Aliyah. Dr. Mark Shinar moved to Israel in 2017 with his family after a career in Jewish education in the United States. Since moving to Israel, he's held leadership roles in Jewish schools, continued his work as an educational consultant, and become an important voice in both the LGBTQ and Orthodox communities. His writing, especially his blog and his Time of Israel columns, explore questions of belonging, parenting, leadership, and authenticity with rare honesty. I'm very fortunate to have met Mark early in my Aliyah journey and lucky to have become friends with him as well. So Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, David. Appreciate it.
I'm very happy that you're here. Before we dive into your Aliyah and also your writing, let's do a quick overview. Before you made Aliyah in 2017, what were you doing? Where were you living? What was going on?
Before making Aliyah in 2017, I was living in Riverdale, New York. I was the general studies principal at SAR High School, which is one of the larger modern Orthodox Jewish high schools in New York. I was living there with my wife and my 4 children, my 4 sons. Primarily, my life and work was grounded in the community and in running the Jewish day school. Prior to that, I had been a head of school in California, so I'd been in the headship for specifically of Orthodox Jewish day schools for quite some time before coming to Israel. I'm a New Jersey kid, born and raised, so being on the East Coast was pretty much home base for me the whole time.
And how did you and your family come to the decision to make Aliyah? Was it something everyone was on board with? Took a long time to come together?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're also a Camp Mosheva family. I've been working in Camp Mosheva for the last 25, 30 years at this point. At that point, it was a little less, of course. But for anybody who knows Camp Mosheva, it's a modern Orthodox Jewish sleepaway camp in the Poconos, but it's got a very specific kind of agenda around the power of Aliyah, the importance of making Aliyah. It's a B'nai Kippah camp, so it's very hyper-focused on Israel and the centrality of Jews living in Israel. So it's a big deal. So I could say that, as a member of the staff there and as somebody who raised my kids were more or less, quote unquote, born in camp and kind of grew up in camp as well. So Aliyah was always, I guess, simmering in the background as a real possibility. And at the same time, as a Jewish educator in the United States, I was keenly aware of the fact that it wasn't apples to apples. I couldn't just take my skills and transfer them over to Israel. The way that the Israeli educational system works is very different than the way that the private Jewish day school system works in the United States. I thought I was doing really important work. I felt very good about my work. I felt very successful in the work that I was doing. So I had always said, and my wife at the time and I had always said, if there was an opportunity in Israel to go and it made sense for our purposes from a career point of view, we would consider it. Barring that, Aliyah was an idea. It was a thought. I wouldn't say it was a dream or an aspiration. It was sort of an assumption that it was something we needed to do, should be doing, but not necessarily a practical decision. And therefore, we always said, should a job come up, we'd hop at the opportunity. But until such time, we weren't necessarily planning an Aliyah.
So a job must have come up then.
So a job came up, right? How interesting is that? Because the more you say, yeah, I'll go as soon as a job comes up, knowing full well that a job will never come up, that was a very, safe space to be. And then all of a sudden, a job came up. One of my students from many, many years ago, I must have taught her in 5th grade, 20 years prior. She was now working for an organization, a private organization here in Israel, that was interested in opening up one of the first private English immersion schools for Israeli children. The fact that I was her teacher many years ago was a coincidence, but she happened to work for the organization, and one of her job responsibilities for the head of the Amutah was to advertise and try to recruit internationally a potential founding principal for this new school.
Head of Amutah, what's Amutah?
An Amutah is a non-for-profit organization here in Israel. So this head of this non-for-profit was looking for somebody to become the founding principal of this brand new school. She called me. I found me through Facebook. She called me. How are you? It's been such a long time. It was so nice to speak to her. And then she said, I'm working for this non-for-profit, Amutah is the word, and they're looking to open up this private English immersion school for Israeli children. Would you be interested in having a discussion with us about being the founding principal, educational principal? I said, sure, nothing wrong with having a discussion. And that process took about a year. of interviews and conversations and considerations before I was actually offered the position. And when I was offered the position, then I was in a real pickle because on the one hand, I had no interest in leaving SAR. I was so happy in Riverdale. It was exactly where I wanted to be and what I wanted to be doing, both from a career perspective and just the community that I was living in and the way I was raising my family. And on the other hand, I'd always said, if an opportunity, if a door opens, you walk through it. And certainly if an opportunity in Israel opens, you'd be a fool not to take it, even though the unknowns were remarkable, right? You pack up your family, a relatively young family, you move to another country, you hope for the best. But those unknowns were somewhat mitigated by the fact that I had a job, and it was a job that I understood. I knew what it was going to look like. I knew what it would feel like. I knew how to open a school or how to think about opening a school. So a lot of turmoil in making the decision. When I would ask my friends for advice, they would all say, of course you have to go. You'd be an idiot not to. When I'd ask my father for advice, he'd say, of course you have to stay. You'd be an idiot not to. So everybody had a perspective and a point of view. And I really got to a place, my wife and I at the time, we really got to a place where we said, listen, doors open, you walk through them. If it doesn't work, you can always come back, which turns out is not as easy or true as it sounds. But if it doesn't work, you can always come back. But here's the deal. You'll regret what you didn't do a whole lot more than you'll regret what you did do. If we didn't take this opportunity, that was a clear sign to us that if this wasn't the thing that was going to bring us on Aliyah, then nothing would. So here it is, an opportunity sitting at your doorstep. Would you walk through it or don't you? And if you're not going to, then stop talking about Aliyah. Never say the word again, because this is the chance. Do it or don't. And so we did.
And the kids and your wife, were they at that point already, after this whole process, once the day comes to get on the plane, are they excited, nervous, all the above?
Yeah, so my wife, Lauren, is probably one of the most flexible and we can do it attitude types of people in the world. So when an opportunity would come up, and that was true when we were first married and we moved to California for me to be ahead of school. And then when we moved back to New York, her work is flexible with her. She can telecommute in all kinds of ways. But more than that, Lauren sees opportunities and grabs them. That's an area of strength for her. Much more than for me. I'm a whole lot more conservative around those things. When we told the kids, again, because we're raising them in this Camp Moshava SAR sort of environment where Zionism and Aliyah are really honored, they're considered to be a badge of honor, a big deal. When we told them we were making Aliyah, they were for the most part on board with the adventure, and their friends, their teachers, the people in their community in the United States really treated them like heroes. They were put on a pedestal for 8 months because of their Aliyah, and they were into that as young kids. They appreciated that their whole worlds praised them and gave them such positive feedback for the possibility that they were going. When it was time to go on the plane, we went on one of those big Nefesh B'Nefesh planes in August. I for sure had the hardest time from the six of us. I was really, really anxious and scared to leave what was good and what I understood behind and go into the unknown. I like control. I like things to look a certain way. I just starting over again just felt like the most daunting thing in the world. I didn't have a choice at that point. The die was already cast. But I would say that I, of the six of us in the family, I was the most emotional and the most apprehensive about the experience.
Where did you land when you made Aliyah, and how long were you there?
Before we made Aliyah, we had found an apartment. I had come on a pilot trip, seen the apartment. It was significantly smaller than anything we had in Riverdale. I mean significantly. Beautiful place in Modi'in, so I don't want to say that it wasn't. It was just enough bedrooms to go around, but just the size of everything was miniature relative to what we owned in the city in Riverdale. And so that was somewhat of an adjustment, right? Because you're not just holding on to your emotional things, you're holding on to your possessions, and you're grounding yourself in what's yours. And when you go to this place that's so much smaller and you try to figure out how do I recreate a life here, and you realize, okay, it's not copy and paste. You really have to build from scratch. But we came straight to our new apartment in Modi'in in August.
And what was your journey like over the ensuing years in terms of yourself? Because you've written about your journey of coming out. And how did making Aliyah intersect with that, if at all?
Yeah, it's a great question. When I made Aliyah, I had been closeted since I'm 9 years old, just to kind of give it a little bit of context. I got married at 25 years old. Nobody knew that I was gay. I didn't talk about it. It wasn't language I used. I wanted more. I went to Jewish day school my whole life. I was an Orthodox kid. I became Orthodox when I was 13. Not only did I go to Jewish day school, I ended up landing in Jewish education. Not only did I land in Jewish education, I landed in Orthodox education. And not only did I land in Orthodox education, I ended up leading and being the heads of Orthodox institutions. So coming out was never on the table. And it was very clear to me that I was making very specific choices in my life that were weaving together a tapestry that was extremely tight. I wanted children. I wanted family. I wanted to be an Orthodox educational leader. I knew that those things wouldn't jive with living a gay life. That's all I knew. I didn't really know much about sexuality. I didn't know, I grew up in the 80s, and the connotations of gay life were very frightening to me. I understood gay as being very equivalent to either extremely campy and effeminate or sick, to be quite honest. I grew up in the height of the AIDS epidemic, and that's what I understood as, gay. And I certainly in my lifetime didn't have or see any gay role models or voices of people that were like me or that could have been like me, that were grounded in a certain set of religious values and identity while simultaneously wanting to be truthful and authentic. So I didn't have that. So I did understand every step of the way. I got married at 25 years old. I understood what I was doing in theory. I didn't particularly understand the consequences of those decisions, but it was what I wanted. And so I did what I wanted to do. As things unfolded when I came on Aliyah, it had nothing to do with my sexuality. But what did happen is I ended up opening the school that I told you about with much success. And the school was extremely successful. And at the same time, I was really struggling and having a difficult time, primarily because the person who I was working for and I simply, I'll put it in the easiest terms, we just didn't see eye to eye. But I thought it was a little bit more extreme than that. The experience I had with my boss, the person who was funding the school, had a lot of, we just had divergent values. And in a lot of ways, I saw it for the first time as a failure on me, and that I couldn't figure out how to make it work. Whether or not that's completely and totally accurate is not relevant, but I took it very hard. I had never had a professional experience before where certainly as a leader, where I felt so deflated. And I blame that entirely on my Aliyah. I said, look, I came to this different country and I thought I could do it. And even though on face value, everything looks successful, I am simply miserable. I was so unhappy for lots of reasons, but primarily because it wasn't professionally giving me the kind of satisfaction that I was looking for. While at the same time, here I was in Modi'in, living here for 2-3 years. I hadn't built the framework of community either, right? So I was running a school. I was living in a relatively new town as an immigrant in a new country without a real strong sense of language or culture. And funnily enough, and I wouldn't have anticipated this back then, but funnily enough, all of the frameworks that I had built around my sexuality to keep me very deeply closeted and in the box were very obviously, if not slowly, unraveling in front of me. I no longer had the community that was holding me in place. I no longer had the culture of my hometown that was holding me in place. I didn't have the job or satisfaction in the job that was holding me in place. And all of those pieces contributed to somewhat of a depression and a depressive state. Then it's March 2020, right? So you throw yourself into COVID, and COVID kind of created a whole new reality, because now not only was I miserable at work, but I was stuck at home. Right. And on a certain level, that was very beautiful to be with my family. And on a certain level, it shone a very harsh spotlight on me and the relationship that I had with my wife and the family. And there was nowhere to be. There was nowhere to go. There was no escape outlet. I was just really facing myself. That didn't lead me to coming out of the closet. It just led me, like I said, into somewhat of an emotional low. And I got another job. I left the school, and I got another job to be the head of school of a program called Alexander Mas High School in Hod HaSharon. So a much more American high school, much more aligned with what I understood education to be. And I figured if I get a job that will be much more of a fit and connected to what I do, that should resolve some of the turbulence that I'm feeling internally. It didn't. I went to work and I was still feeling this great sense of displacement and lack of connection. And I really assumed that that was fully connected to my Aliyah, and that it turns out what I need to do is go back to America, pack my bags. I'm just so unhappy here and I need to go back to America.
So at that point, are you able to access services here or help particularly as an English speaker, primarily an English speaker? Yeah. Were you how did you figure it out here?
Totally. And if I was living on my own, I probably would have packed my bags and left within a certain amount of time as soon as it got really hot or uncomfortable. Unfortunately, I have children, and my children are not unfortunately, I have children. Unfortunately, it wasn't so easy to do that because fortunately, my children were, in fact, acclimating very quickly and were finding themselves a part of the community here and enjoying their experiences here in Israel. And we're actually doing great. So now you say, okay, if I move back to America, first of all, you can't just go back. You have to recreate all kinds of things. But more than that, my kids aren't ping pong balls, and they don't have to be shot back and forth between America and Israel because of my unhappiness. So I had to really take a good hard look at the realities that this was about me and it wasn't really about my family and what they needed. And to your point, with the help of a friend and a recommendation, I found a wonderful therapist in Ra'anana, a private therapist, an English speaker, an Australian woman, just an exceptional, thoughtful, empathetic, smart person. So, we talk about therapeutic intervention. It really is about finding the right fit. And she happened to have been the right fit. And when I came to her, I started with, my name is Mark, and I just want to talk about the fact that I really regret making Aliyah, and I need to figure out what to do about that. And she said, okay, we're gonna work on that, and we'll talk about what it is and what it could be. And then the second session, I said, and I also think that a large part of this issue was I had a really toxic work situation, and I need to kind of come out of what that means to have had somewhat of a traumatic experience in work, something I've never really done, and how that links to my Aliyah. And maybe if I can figure that out, then it'll help me understand what I should do about the Israel situation.
And third time is the charm.
And then the third time I walked in there and I was like, all right, I've never said this out loud to anybody, but since I'm 9 years old, I know I'm gay. And she goes, that's a good one. We should do that one. That's the thing, right? And and I was like, yeah, I guess but I just want to be clear that I'm not doing anything with that. I've said it to you. Now you hear it. I don't know why I said it to you. I don't know why I felt like I needed to say it to you. It's not relevant. And she's like, no, of course it's not relevant. It has nothing to do with your joy or personal satisfaction. Don't worry about it. This whole thing is clearly about your Aliyah, and the gay thing is just a thing. And I was like, all right, you're making fun of me. And she's like, no, what are you talking about? And she was incredible because her work in therapy was very much about helping people rewrite the narratives that they write in their brain, right? I created a whole story around how the world was going to respond to me coming out, how my family was going to respond, how my career was going to respond. And those narratives were so dark and ended always so badly that why the heck would you come out? You'd lose everything, right? And so I would say to her, great, I told you I'm gay, but I'm not coming out. And she would say to me, no, of course not. Do not come out. It'll be terrible if you come out. But what if it wasn't? Just play with me for a second. She was like, what would it look like if it wasn't terrible? What would your kids say if it wasn't terrible? What would your career look like if it wasn't terrible? What kinds of things would you be doing if you weren't, rocking yourself in a corner at the end of the story? And her ability to get me to, it's actually a remarkable tool in therapy, but her ability to get me to start rewriting the narrative and start thinking about the possibility that I could live a more authentic and holistic life without losing everything that I had worked so hard to build actually rewired the way I think in many ways. I actually experienced a shift in my understanding around how this thing could work.
If you could imagine it, all of a sudden, it's potentially possible for it to actually be in reality.
Isn't that amazing? Isn't it amazing how the human psychology works? One day I basically said to myself, I'm going to tell Lauren today I'm gay. Now we're married 20 years. And one day I was like, today I'm going to tell her I'm gay. I don't know why. I don't know why. And I don't know why that day was the day. But there was at some point I was like, all right, I can now imagine it. And if I can imagine it and this is where I want to go, then there's no day like today. And I did experience it almost as a flip of a switch around once my brain could start imagining the possibility that this could work, then I could start moving towards a direction where I would make it work. Nobody at that time had known. And so Lauren was my ex-wife was the first person that needed to hear this from me. And then from there, the story evolved.
And so I'm sure that couldn't have been easy for anyone, including your family. And where did it end up? Where is it now?
Well, I told my wife in, let's say, January time, and my opening phrase, and it was, ever since I'm 9 years old, I know I'm gay. What are we going to do about that? Like it was, what are we going to do? It didn't, there was no therefore. It wasn't, I know I'm gay and therefore I want to leave and therefore I want to come out and therefore I didn't have a therefore here. I just needed her to hear those words. And from there, we did a lot of work as a couple to try to figure out what we wanted to do. And a lot of our work was grounded on what we thought would be in the best interests of our family and the 4 children. Once we went through a significant amount of intervention for us to try to figure out what we wanted to do, which made the whole thing so much more healthy and friendly and loving, which is exactly how our relationship ended. Friendly and to this very day, friendly and loving and caring with our children at the center of the story. Then once we made a decision, then we told our children shortly thereafter, all 4 of our children. And then shortly thereafter, I kind of came out to the world, as it were, because we didn't want the children to feel like they were holding on to some sort of secret. So the people we wanted to tell, we told. The people that we wanted to hear, but we didn't feel like we needed to tell directly, we wrote somewhat of an open letter to. And then whatever, people could share that letter, rumors, whatever. But I came out kind of like in a bang, like 150, 200 people knew all at the same time because of a WhatsApp letter that I wrote with Lauren and that we shared. So we really worked very hard to control that narrative. The work that I was doing at the time in Alexander Muss was also just very fortuitous because it was a pluralistic community program. My board president was an out gay man. So it was the first Jewish day school leadership position I was in where my sexuality was actually quite irrelevant to the leadership. That would not have been the case in any of my previous positions. And I think that also gave me a little bit more of an opening to come out because isn't it funny, I remember saying to my therapist, the dominoes are falling. I can feel each of the dominoes falling. And she looked at me and she said, I want to reframe that. She said, to me, it sounds more like the puzzle pieces are coming together. The picture is coming together. And I loved that. I thought that was great. I thought it would really flip the switch for me around like, like I needed to come on Aliyah and I needed to have a bad experience at one work. And I needed to land up in a place where I could be a leader, but my sexuality was not particularly relevant to that leadership. I'd never had that before. Wow, there actually is logical sequence of events that have played out to the fact that I can come out where I can come out now and I didn't feel like I could do that 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 12 years ago. And now I can. And in a certain level, at the time I was 46 years old. I'm 49. So all this is going down 3 years ago. I felt like I had a whole bunch less to lose. The only thing I was anxious about in this whole thing, and when I say anxious, I mean sick to my stomach. I'm like really bad anxious, like not just like cute anxious, but like the highest level of anxiety that I've ever experienced in my life was the fear that telling my kids would somehow shift my relationship with my children, or create some sort of negative dynamic in my family. That didn't happen for a whole host of reasons, including the fact that I have extraordinary children. They have an extraordinary mother, and I think we handled it together very, very well. Once the children were no longer on the table as a threat of something I could lose, the rest of it to me felt completely possible because what else was left to lose that I really cared about?
Right.
Friends weren't going to be my friends anymore. Well, if you've been my friends this long, then you're probably the type of people that this wouldn't phase too much. And if you need to leave me because it's just too hard for you, well, at 47 years old, please pack your bags and go. Bye.
Goodbye, Felicia.
Right? Why Felicia is exactly right. Like, I don't need, like, anybody who felt like this is too hard for me was like, okay, then there's nothing here for me to lose anymore other than the things that were most important. And once those things, my father was amazing. But at the end of the day, what did he lose? Like he lost a great daughter-in-law who they still speak all the time. But like for him, like the marriage, he mourned the loss of a marriage, but he certainly, like he didn't lose grandkids and he didn't lose he didn't lose a vision of what his life was supposed to look like or what his son's life was supposed to look like. So, on a certain level, I held on to the sexuality for 20 plus years, and it created a great deal of rifts and challenges for me in my personal life and my marriage. And it was the secret elephant in the room. So I'm not sure that I would recommend that that's the direction people should or shouldn't take. Everybody's got his or her own story. But for my purposes, when I came out, as much of an upheaval as it was, I was in a much more stable place to be able to say, this is where we are and this is who I am. And people can either get on board or not. And most people, like I said, at this point, where they are, great, you do you. That doesn't mean that there aren't, times where I still feel very much like the outsider or feel minimized in relation to my straight life or my community. And there have been, and I write about this in the blog, moments where it's been very clear that me being out has kind of limited some of the access points that I've had as an educational leader than had I chosen to stay in the closet. I recognize that. I also, when I left Alexander Muss High School, because I just didn't want to be the head of school and go through a divorce and come out, not because the school had any problem with it, but because I needed space from being in the spotlight. And I opened up my own consulting firm, which is what I do now. I work with educational institutions, Jewish educational institutions that range from pluralistic all the way to ultra Orthodox pretty much, or more Haredi. I don't know who doesn't hire me because of my sexuality. And quite frankly, it doesn't really matter. I only know who does hire me. So as long as I have clients and my clients, I don't really work with my clients on sexuality. It's irrelevant. It happens to be a piece of my identity, but it's not relevant to the kind of work I do in leadership and support for Jewish day schools. It seems to me, I can say with a great deal of gratitude to the Jewish community and with a great deal of pride, it seems to me that my talent and my area of professional expertise speaks for itself. And the fact that I am out, am gay, write about it, write about the intersectionality between orthodoxy and sexuality has not ruffled too many feathers along the way. So that's been gratifying. All right.
So you're working as an educational consultant, and you mentioned the blog. You have a blog on your website, which we'll give a shout out to later, but also you are a writer for Times of Israel. So what is that? How often do you do for them?
Yeah, when I first came to Aliyah, I actually started my own blog, of a weekly blog, kind of journaling my experiences making Aliyah, which had nothing to do with sexuality and had everything to do with just the social realities of moving to Israel. And I wrote like 52 pieces. I really wrote one a week every week for that first year. And I really tried to ground it in a combination of humor and pain and pathos and anxiety and love and happily ever after, but not always, And so the first time I really started blogging was when I came on Aliyah. And then I took a break because it was the year and I had nothing to blog about. And then I came out. My first blog, which you referenced, which is Broken Roads, was about a year after my coming out. It took me about a year before I could really start writing about, like I said, the intersectionality between my sexuality and my religious identity and being a parent and all of the components of my life that were actually woven together to try to keep me together were now really splintering and falling apart, and how I was going to make meaning out of that. I'm a writer, so I find writing to be very cathartic. It took me a year to write that and go public with it. And it wasn't a secret, so to speak, that I was out for my closer circles, but it was the first time by choosing Times of Israel that I chose to kind of go big with that story. And the reason why I did that was not for any sensational value, but rather I don't see enough writing from Orthodox gay guys on the internet. And I felt like I had something to contribute. I had a voice here that was relatively nuanced and worthy of sharing. When October 7th rolled around, I really took a hiatus and I stopped writing because I felt like anything post October 7th that I had to say about sexuality was actually, I couldn't come up with a way to make that make sense without me coming across as just so tone deaf to what was happening in the world, right? Like people were writing fast and furiously post October 7th about things that they needed to write about. I didn't feel like I had anything of value to contribute to that conversation. And I thought that if I was writing about sexuality in a post October 7th reality, I would come across as completely and totally
missing the point.
So I stopped writing, and I stopped writing very purposely. And that had nothing to do with sexuality. It just simply had something to do with the fact that now is not the time and now is not the place. And I honored that. And it felt really important to me. since October 7th, I've written maybe two, maybe three blogs that were very relevant. I remember writing one when I was in London. I wrote a blog about sitting in a barber chair, and the barber was just asking me all kinds of questions about where am I from and what do I do and about my family. And I found myself continuously lying. Oh, I didn't say I was from Israel. I said I was from New York. And I talked about my wife and kids, but I didn't say I'd come out. I was remarking how in a post-October 7th world, how many of us are actually in closets of our
closet.
Right? How many of us are in closets of our own? And that closet may or may not be about sexuality, but it could also be about where you live, or are you a Zionist, or what you feel about, about the war and your position. And I didn't feel safe sitting in a barber chair in London with a guy with a blade to my ear, talking about, I'm a gay guy who lives in Jerusalem, I just didn't feel like that was safe to me. And that was also my own gremlin. And I projected my own anxiety and fear onto that guy. I have no idea what he would have or wouldn't have said, but I thought that was an interesting experience that I found myself sitting in a stranger's chair in a barber in London, creating lie upon lie, narrative upon narrative to keep myself in a very structured box or closet. And I thought that was noteworthy.
So we met through Chavruta, through the English-speaking group of Chavruta. Can you tell us what Chavruta is and what your involvement with it is?
Sure. Chavruta is an organization for LGBT people that find themselves on the scale of observance and orthodoxy. So you don't need to be Orthodox to be a member of Chavruta, but you are somewhere on the scale. Traditional Orthodox, Haredi, used to be Orthodox, not anymore. But so you have been in Hebrew, the word is the retzef, which means the prism or the spectrum of orthodoxy. And it is meant specifically as a home and as a place for LGBT people that align with some of those Orthodox, if not all of those Orthodox values. It is a primarily Israeli group. When I came out, I was doing a little bit of research because I had no context for any supports or any friendships. I didn't have any gay friends. I didn't have any gay community. I didn't have any gay outlet, social or otherwise. And I called Chavruta with a relatively limited Hebrew. I said, I'm curious what's available for guys like me. And the answer was at the time, not a whole lot. Chavruta tend to skew relatively younger, people in their early to mid 20s through early to mid 30s. I was already in my mid to late 40s, and there wasn't a ton of resources out there for English speaking people. So I had asked them if I could help, and I volunteered to open up Chavruta's first English speaking group that aligned with Chavruta's values, right? The people that found themselves on the spectrum of Orthodox life, whatever that meant. But that specifically, it would not collect a specific age group. The demographic it would collect are people that had made Aliyah at some point or another and were interested in socializing and connecting with other gay people that had similar experiences. It took them about 6, 8, maybe 12 months until we were able to really organize it and figure out what we were going to do and how to get that off the ground. Ultimately, we did. And I started the first English speakers group for Chavruta. I did that for about 2.5 years. I stepped back from that about 3 or 4 months ago, when Chavruta asked me to join their board of directors. So now I sit on the board of directors of Chavruta. I've passed the wand over to other really wonderful English speakers to run the programming side of things. And now I sit on the board as a member. And my primary responsibilities to Chavruta right now are strategic planning and strategic thinking and support for the groups, and how Chavruta leverages itself into what's coming next. Because the organization itself has grown tremendously in the last 3 to 5 years under incredibly talented leadership of the CEO, Netanel Scheller, and the sitting board presidents. There's been a real renaissance in Chavruta in the last few years as a main key player in supporting Orthodox or people on the spectrum of Orthodoxy, LGBT people in the Orthodox spectrum.
I have to say, I think it's a great organization for me so far, and the social aspect has been really valuable to be able to connect with people being here with many similar values. So what's coming up for you next? And if people want to follow you and your writing, how do they do that?
What's coming up for me next? The summer comes up for me next, which means I'm actually leaving to the United States for a couple of months where I'll be working with Jewish day schools all around the country, doing 1 or 2 day strategic planning retreats for administrative teams. That's what I do. Primarily, my work is deeply connected to leadership and being able to create cohesive and collaborative leadership teams and how we operate and function, not in silos, but as healthy communicators. And I guess all of this, the kind of thread that ties all of this together is healthy communication, right? The success of my coming out was largely due to the success of the family structure that I had built. And that was, that too was grounded in healthy communication. So that's what I do in the summer, and I'll be away. It's a little bit of an anxious summer for us, given that I have some of my children will be in the United States, and I have 2 children who are in the Israeli army. So they're going to be here and are continuing to be here. And it is obviously a very, very tense time for all of us. And so I guess I'll just say that in all of this, and as wonderful as it is that you're highlighting me, and I feel so grateful to be part of this, I also want to acknowledge, our soldiers, the Chatufim, the hostages, and hope that what's next for Am Yisrael and for the summer is we see an end to this conflict with all of our hostages home, safe and sound, would be my greatest wish and blessing. How you keep in touch with me? My website's probably a good place, markshinar.com. That's where I post my writing. And also just, following me on Facebook. Mark Shinar is another great way to catch me. I am Mark Shinar Consulting on Instagram. So there are lots of ways to find me, LinkedIn as well. But mostly Facebook is probably the best way to keep track of where I am and what I'm doing. I know it's somewhat antiquated, but it works for me. So I'm happy to stay on that platform. And that's where the majority of my writing can be found.
Every episode, we have a word of the pod where we share a word that is Israeli slang, either Hebrew, Arabic, a contraction. And Mark, what's our word of the pod?
You know what word I love? Zorem. Zorem. Zorem means just go with the flow. Just chill and let it be, right? Are you Zorem? Yes, I'm totally Zorem. Lizrom? Yes, ani Zorem legamre. I am totally chill. Let's just make it happen and not get too caught up in the plan. And I think that if we're willing to be Zorem, I think we see that is how you get to be successful in your Aliyah and successful in all kinds of challenging things. We can do hard things, it turns out. Human beings are wired to be resilient and to do hard things. You just have to be Zorem. That's what I think.
Excellent. Mark, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. And thanks for your friendship.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me. So grateful.
That's it for this episode of Ola at Large, Aliyah Stories. I want to thank my guests and I want to thank you. Thanks for listening. Please give a like, give a follow, and catch you next time.